Health Forum NZ, and Lynda today is supported by her husband, Craig Blackwood. Lynda, I'll start by asking you to introduce yourself to the Commissioners.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity of being here today. I really appreciate it. Is my mic turned on? Okay. My name is Lynda Wharton. My professional past is that I've had a dual career. I'm now officially retired from the clinical career. I was a registered traditional Chinese acupuncturist and naturopath for 35 years, and I owned and operated a very busy holistic women's health clinic where over the course of my career, I estimate I had 60,000 consultations with women from all walks of life in New Zealand. My parallel career to that is I was a health researcher and freelance journalist for multiple publications, magazines and newspapers in New Zealand and Australia. And I'm the author of 3 holistic women's health books, all of which are now out of print. That was quite a few years ago. So that's my background before the COVID years.
Thank you. And is it right that you therefore don't have a particular specialty in infectious diseases or vaccines?
No, I don't. No, not at all.
But is it right that from your journalism role, you had a particular interest in looking at and watching the development of the vaccine of COVID when that began in 2021?
Very much so. I mean, health and well-being has been my vocation and my passion for my whole adult life. And in my role as a journalist, I researched and wrote about several traditional vaccines. I wrote about flu vaccines, HPV, Gardasil vaccine, shingles, and MMR. And so because of that research and writing for mainstream publications, I had a fairly good idea of what was involved in the development of a traditional vaccine and the time frame that was required for that.
And you've described seeing that you, from your perspective, saw red flags in that approval process for the Pfizer vaccine. I wonder if you can explain your concerns about
Certainly.
That process.
So in that first year before the mRNA products arrived in New Zealand, especially at the beginning of 2020, I watched with great interest the development, the warp speed development of the new vaccines. I tend to call them injectables because there's a definition issue around that, but we'll call them vaccines in this space just for ease. And as I watched the process and I realised that we were going to go from the discovery of a novel pathogen, the likes of which had never been seen before, we were going from the discovery of that to injections in arms in exactly 12 months. That was a red flag for me because that is unprecedented. For a traditional vaccine, a 5-year development period is warp speed, and many of them have taken 10 years. So I found that alarming, and then when I became aware that the 2 front runners for the global rollout were using an mRNA platform, that was a red flag for me because in that 2020 year, I spent a lot of time as an investigative journalist researching mRNA and lipid nanoparticles, both of which are in the Pfizer product. And what I came to realise was that there had been a history of 30 to 40 years with the medical development of mRNA trying to create a product that was safe and effective to be used at population scale unsuccessfully. And instead, the mRNA products that have been used have been very small scale, usually individualized medicine for people with otherwise terminal illnesses. The red flags with the actual Pfizer trial that was used to authorize the community mRNA product that's used in New Zealand. This trial, the vaccine arm only injected 23,000 people, which obviously is not enough. It's not a big enough population sample to detect rare, serious adverse events. So I knew that a lot of the data collection would be in the form of post-marketing surveillance, what happens when it's actually used in people. That was a red flag too. I've got more. Do you want me to go on?
We'll keep moving at the moment, if that's all right. So it's fair to say that you were concerned about the speed at which it had been developed and about the use of these technologies that hadn't been used at that scale and in this way before, and
yes.
that made you alarmed. And just as I note that in your submission, you also note feeling frustrated that these concerns weren't being discussed widely. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, it was my expectation, because I'm not an immunologist, a virologist, I'm not a scientist with a PhD. I was certain that when it was New Zealand's time to roll out this product, that there would be a community-wide conversation where experts would stand up and talk about the kind of issues that I was concerned about. The other red flag for me was that I was looking at the pharmacovigilance data from countries that rolled out ahead of us, in particular America and UK, the yellow card system and the American VARS system. And right from the beginning, they were recording serious adverse events in their databases. And the nature of the serious adverse events and the scope, the variety of them, was a red flag for me.
Thank you. And can you tell us then how these concerns led to you developing and founding the Health Forum New Zealand?
Yeah. So I started to say that I expected that there would be a conversation when the product arrived in New Zealand, and the scientists would start discussing some of the concerns that I also had. And then when it arrived, and I very quickly became aware that this wasn't going to happen, and that there was actually just going to be one messaging around the use of the injectables, and that was safe and effective. And not only was there only the one messaging, but any voices outside of that were rapidly quashed. I became very frustrated, because I believed that in order for New Zealanders to make a fully informed decision about taking a novel injectable approved, only provisionally approved, with very short-term data, 2 months of data, I believe New Zealanders needed more information for their own personal informed consent. And because I'm a writer and investigative journalist, I decided to start a page on Facebook to start sharing some of the emerging preprint science and the pharmacovigilance data from around the world, and some of the early expert voices that were starting to speak out in other countries.
Can I just interrupt you and,
sure.
and ask what you mean when you say preprint science?
Oh, okay. So papers that have been written but haven't yet been peer reviewed. So because often the peer review process is long and difficult.
Thank you.
But so authors publish their science, their papers at the beginning, and then wait for that preprint process. So I just started a Facebook group with the intention of sharing some of the things I was coming across. And I thought maybe 1,000 people, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people in New Zealand might be interested. And do you want me to say what actually happened?
Yes, tell us about the
Health
members.
Forum.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what actually happened was, very quickly I became known as the only place in New Zealand that was really discussing the other side of the story. And of course, when we started our rollout, because of the nature of the product, Pfizer themselves expected a 1.2% serious adverse event rate. That was what was demonstrated in the clinical trial. With rolling out tens and then hundreds of thousands of doses a week, we rapidly started to see the serious adverse events occurring in New Zealand. They had nowhere to go. They heard about the Health Forum, and they started flooding into our group, the Health Forum. And so rapidly I went from expecting that I would have a fairly cerebral, analytical space to preprint science, to becoming once again holding space for sick, injured people, which I'd done for 35 years in my career. We were a closed group. We moderated it very, very tightly. We kept it as a safe space. And we existed for 9 months before we were deplatformed at an unprecedented time in New Zealand and global history, where any voice, any messaging around vaccine harm was censored out of existence. Nothing could cause vaccine hesitancy. So we did manage to last 9 months, and then we were deplatformed.
Can I just pause you for a second,
yeah, sure.
and say, so you grew to the membership, and I think you might not have mentioned, but it was over 50,000, 58,000 members, and these were people that were concerned about the vaccine and whether it was safe, or that felt that they had a negative health effect after having the vaccine, or otherwise.
Yes, so we had, in the Health Forum, we had people from all walks of life, but we had a very high proportion of our members were educated professionals. So we had a lot of medical personnel and professionals in our group, a lot of teachers, especially when the mandates started in New Zealand. We also had a lot of military, government workers. We had surgeons, forensic psychiatrists. We had the only orthopaedic pediatric surgeon in New Zealand able to perform a particular type of surgery, who also refused to take the product, having researched it. So we had a very diverse spectrum of people in the Health Forum, and we had thousands of people who had been seriously injured by the Pfizer mRNA, and many more people in our group who were loving and supporting a family member who was injured. And then, as we saw when Chelsea spoke about her sister Amanda, sadly we had many families who believed that their loved one had died as a direct result of either a willingly taken injectable or a mandated product.
And is it right then, when you said this was the only place people had to turn, that these people were struggling to be believed by other doctors or other authorities?
Very much so. I mean, we lived in truly unprecedented times where, at the microcosmic level, we had huge dissent and relationship fracture within families and within friendship groups and workplaces. But extending out from that, the messaging and the propaganda and the inordinate resources devoted to promoting the one message in New Zealand of safe and effective engendered a disbelief in families and communities that anybody could be injured. And so our genuinely injured people, of which I have got the stats here from MedSafe themselves, to December 2023, MedSafe had received over 20,000 reports of serious adverse events, and MedSafe themselves acknowledged they have a reporting rate of no more than 5% of actual events ever reported to them. So by December 23, they had 20,000 events deemed serious. Serious is medically significant, requires hospitalisation and potentially permanent injury. So these people were there and they were in the Health Forum, but because of the messaging, the greater community did not believe they were real, and they were dubbed anti-vaxxers. The ultimate irony, when you've taken a vaccine and be injured, to be dubbed an anti-vaxxer. And conspiracy theorists. They were in our group, all of those people.
And so I guess, is it fair to say that the Health Forum also provided a safe place for people to be believed about these concerns?
Oh, very much so. We were as much we were a psychosocial service at an essential time where people were alienated. Not only were they living with physical injury, they lived with immense psychological injury and trauma from the gaslighting, from doctors and hospitals, from members of parliament who refused to acknowledge they existed, from the government, and from the legacy media, who to this day have not written an article about the tens of thousands of New Zealanders who have lost a loved one or been seriously injured.
just going to move us through a
Sure.
little bit faster so we
I
don't
know,
run
I
out
have
of
a lot
time
to
before
say.
getting
I
everything
know.
out. Yes. Okay. I just will note that in your submissions already to the Commission, you've noted that since then you've continued to monitor and collect information and reports, scientific reports, and I guess research that you feel contributes to your concerns about the virus, and that you've provided those to the Commission.
Very much so.
Yes.
So we're fortunate to have a group of mandated out nurses and medical coders who have now been working for 3 years to create a citizens database of serious adverse events and injury after predominantly the Pfizer mRNA. We have a database now that we only accept first-person reports from the injured person or from the family of the deceased. We have 2,000 well-documented reports in our database now with all the medical records, and we have anonymised and submitted to you, I believe, about 500 of those reports as part of our submission.
And I'll record that you've also passed on studies that you've drawn to the attention of the Commission.
Yes, a lot of peer-reviewed science in our submission, and 25 compendiums of well over 100 OAAs. We operate very much from using the information directly from the government to point out inconsistencies, areas where people haven't received the knowledge that they should have to make an informed consent. So we take the information straight from the government's mouth wherever we can.
And in terms of your research, can you tell us a bit of how you and the Health Forum monitor the health or information or research that you share, either through your Facebook or that you've shared with us as well, how
Yes.
you gather that and
Sure.
monitor it?
So I do all the research and all of the writing. I do have a big team of people helping me in other ways, but I research and I write. And I obviously follow a lot of online journals, scientific journals. I source things from PubMed. Wherever I can, I use peer-reviewed science because it carries a lot more weight than the preprint science. And I subscribe to a lot of newsletters that collate and source such articles as well.
And what about research that we'll hear from also later today? I think about some research that supports the view that the vaccine is safe. Do you also gather that research?
No, I don't, because we're a minority. We're a platform that gives you the information that is missing in all of the other places that you can source information from. So you won't find our kind of information peer-reviewed as it is. You won't find it on the New Zealand Ministry of Health website, but you can find the sort of information you're talking about on that website.
So is it fair to say you try and fill a gap that you perceive exists?
Very much so. I fill a gap. I never tell people not to take the product. I haven't done that once in probably well over 40,000 posts now. My job is to bring them the information so that people can exercise what is their legal, moral and ethical right to make a fully informed decision before they take a product with an unprecedented level of serious adverse events and deaths globally.
That's great. But you yourself, I think in that format, it's fair to say you yourself don't see it as your role to try and find a balanced view or try and reconcile the different studies.
No, I don't. My role is to fill a niche that doesn't otherwise exist. And also, one of the differences with the Health Forum, I mean, there's a lot of noise in the social media sphere, obviously, and not everybody strives to source information that is credible, studies that are being carried out by scientists and professionals who have got a long history of experience and many thousands of citations in journals. So we try to keep our standard of the information that we share as high as possible.
And can you tell us briefly, you've talked a bit about concerns of being censored and of the Facebook group, for example, being removed. Can you tell us a bit about your concerns of this information being suppressed and how that affected you?
Oh, very much so. So when we had the original Facebook group, at the time, we didn't know that governments were in direct communication with Facebook. New Zealand Department of Internal Affairs, as evidenced by one of the OIAs, I believe, in our submission, had their own takedown portal where they could deem something unworthy and take content off the web, off the Facebook group here in New Zealand. And that was not unique. The same in America. They also had that. And probably Australia, I don't know. So there was unprecedented censorship, genuine reports of serious harm and death following the injectables was deemed misinformation, propaganda, and causing vaccine hesitancy, which was the ultimate crime at the time. So in my group, I had back-to-back personal bans where I would have to continue researching and writing, and one of my admins would have to post for me because I was blocked. For example, I published one of the first peer-reviewed papers on the efficacy of vitamin D for preventing infection, preventing hospitalisation and death, and I earned a 1-month ban for that because that was deemed to promote vaccine hesitancy, e.g., I was saying to people, hey guys, you know, there's something else you can be doing for yourself. And that was a 1-month ban. I also asked the question early on, based on what I was observing in our group, because we had thousands of injured people, I asked the question, am I seeing a link here, an observational link between Pfizer and myocarditis? I asked that question. I got a 1-month ban for that. I asked the same question based on what I was observing in our group about serious menstrual disorders and postmenopausal bleeding in women who took the products. Of course, that has all now been, confirmed that yes, those are all serious adverse events. That was a 1-month ban for answering. So that was the experience of my life, in that first group, when it was the height of the rollout and the mandates we had. If I've got an opportunity, I would like to tell you, we're talking about mandates today. I think it's very important for people to understand, and the commissioners who have received my submission to understand, the general zeitgeist out there is that the mandated who refuse to take the product are definitely at the time, they were scorned. They were rejected by families, workplaces. They were marched off the premises with all their worldly goods in a box and quite literally told that if they came back the next day, they would be trespassed from the building. I just want to give you an idea.
So these are people who were in roles that were then required to be vaccinated to stay in those occupations.
Who were mandated and who decided not to take the product. So, like I say, we do a lot of OAAs, and I just want to give you a little insight into HNZ 0002851. So we asked about medical exemptions because this is, a vital part of the story that we're talking about here. Just to give you an idea, the medical exemption system received 125 applications for exemptions based on anaphylaxis with first dose. Now, anaphylaxis is life-threatening. 114 of those 125 applications were declined. So each of those people faced the decision of taking the second dose and potentially dying, or being marched off the premises with all their worldly goods in a cardboard box. We also had 119 applications from people who developed myocarditis with their first dose, and 76 of those were declined by the medical exemption system. We had 215 applications for serious adverse events with a previous dose. 167 of those were declined. We had 102 applications for pre-existing inflammatory cardiac diseases. 79 of those were declined. 55 applications for acute decompensating heart failure. 48 of those declined. 55 applications for pre-existing conditions. 46 declined. And a known PEG allergy, PEG was the coating on the outside of of the lipid nanoparticles, a known PEG allergy, which is life-threatening, causes life-threatening anaphylaxis, was not even in the terms as a possible medical exemption to apply for. If you had a known PEG allergy, you were to make a specialist appointment with an immunology clinic or in an emergency room, to have a crash cart and a resuscitation team with you while you took the product that was known to potentially have the ability to kill you. And at the same time as Pfizer themselves, in their technical data sheets, were saying nobody with a known PEG allergy must take this product. So that just gives you an insight into the reality that so many of our mandated were living. These were not anti-vax conspiracy theorists. These were real people with genuine medical concerns who simply could not get a medical exemption.
And those figures that you've quoted from is from the ministry through OAA process.
Yes,
is that right?
HNZ 000-28251.
So just finally, talking here about the medical exemption process, but also the overall feeling of being having views suppressed. And I wonder if you'd like to finish by just talking about the impact of that on your members
Yes.
and social cohesion as a whole, in your observations of that.
Well, as part of my submission, and commissioners will have seen as well, because we have such a big social media presence, we now have over 90,000 followers across various platforms. One of the things we did was we asked questions and we collated the responses. And what came through, I already knew this, but I wanted to present it to you. What comes through loud and clear is the seemingly permanent the number of people who are permanently disenfranchised in terms of trusting the government, trusting their doctors, the entire medical system and the Ministry of Health. The COVID response with the propaganda that alienated anybody with a different opinion, the silencing of the injured and the bereaved, the excommunication of the mandated out, with generally the public and the media having no understanding of who those people were and what really happened to them. That has led to a huge amount of gaslighting and marginalising and othering. And so those people, they're never coming back. They're never going to trust authority again. And if indeed we have another pandemic with another pandemic response, the pushback is going to be infinitely greater than anything we saw this time round, because the trust is gone.
And do you count yourself as one of the people who've lost trust?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I speak for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands standing behind me, but sadly I'm one of them. And that's a personal grief for me. I never used to be this person. I've seen things that I never would have believed was possible in the country that I love, in a supposed free democracy where human rights are championed, where we have a Bill of Rights, where we have the right, the moral, the ethical and the legal right to make individualised medical decisions based on a genuine informed consent process. I never thought I would witness what I've witnessed in this country.
Thank you. I'll just ask if the commissioners have any questions before we...
Commissioner Kavanagh.
No, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kelly. You have asked all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Wharton, in your studies, you will have seen information that you don't regard as credible, I assume.
Oh, yes, and I don't publish it, definitely.
Can you give some examples of misinformation or disinformation that you have encountered in the studies that you've done?
So one of the areas that we never post, because I believe that potentially it falls into that realm, is the issues around nanotechnology being included in the Pfizer and the Moderna. I don't believe there's sound science that would permit me with all good conscience to publish that content, so I've never touched any of that. That's one example.
And what do you mean by the nanotechnology?
Well, some people believe that because Pfizer samples have been looked at under high-resolution microscopes, and what is found in there are very unusual visual things that have never been seen in any other products that look like little coils and springs and, strange items. There is a school of thought that there is some kind of nanotechnology included in the product.
But you don't accept that?
I have never written about it. I am sitting on the fence, which is why I've never written about it. I'm waiting for real, genuine evidence over time that is the case.
And you haven't seen any genuine evidence of that so far?
Personally, I think there are other explanations for a lot of what I've seen in that area.
You've heard, I assume, theories that there has been an international conspiracy behind vaccination. Is that something that you've observed in the studies that you've done?
Again, I don't write about an international conspiracy. I think that mistakes have been made. I think currently in America, one of the things that is happening is they're doing a lot of work bringing to light conflicts of interest and pharmaceutical lobbying, financing money from, for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which financially did very well out of shares with Pfizer and Moderna in this process. I think there's a complex web beyond just the rollout of an injection in New Zealand. But do I call it a conspiracy? Do I think people are trying to kill us or make us infertile? No, I don't, and I've never written about that. But is it happening? Are people dying and being injured? Most certainly.
You accept, I think, that in the normal course of events, people get sick and die without vaccines.
Oh, yes.
That's just human life, isn't it?
People die, yes, absolutely. People die all the time.
And so there's an issue in relation to vaccination about causality.
Yes, there is.
And that is a difficult issue to confront, isn't it?
Very difficult. There is an internationally operated system for establishing causality, the Bradford Hill criteria, and one of the most powerful, one of the most weighted criteria in that process is temporal connection. Time connection between receipt of a product and the resulting event. And one of our OAAs, we investigated the 196 deaths after the Pfizer that have been reported to MedSafe in New Zealand. And we found that the mean onset for the symptoms that led to the death was 7 days after the receipt of the Pfizer.
But I imagine you would accept that a temporal connection on its own is not sufficient to prove causality.
Absolutely. This is a list of criteria. There are 5 or 6, in fact, there are about 10 criteria on that process. And
so a person who has expertise in epidemiology or vaccinology, if that's a word, would need to be able to establish the causation link between the vaccination and the injury before you could be sure about what was happening in that space?
Partly those people, but first and foremost what would need to happen is a thorough, appropriate post-mortem for all of those people. And that actually hasn't happened in New Zealand. The Coroner's Act was changed halfway through. Many elderly people that passed away in rest homes didn't get a post-mortem, even when they died within a few days of receipt of the product. Coincidental or not, they died after the product. And so first and foremost, that needs to happen.
Understood, but there also has to be a theoretical pathway of causation between the taking of the vaccine and the particular kind of harm that's occurred.
And there are many more than theoretical pathways now. They're part of my submission. I sent in 3,500 peer-reviewed studies and case review compilations evidencing those pathways.
But you agree that in any particular case, a pathway needs to be shown.
Yes, of course.
Thank
Yes, in the individual case, yes.
Thank you very
so.
much.
Thank you very much, Lynda, and thank you, Peter, also for your support. We're going to have a break now until 11:30. We'll be back with the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you.